Thank you for coming. Today I'd like to address, I think, what's on the minds of a lot of Canadians. We were told in the lead up to this resumption of Parliament that the Harper government intended to have a more cooperative attitude and atmosphere within the House. It was the debut this week for new House Leader John Baird. I know John Baird well enough to know that he doesn't always have to be the pit bull he is in question period. I've known him as when he was initially appointed Environment Minister. He is quite capable of being cooperative and effective in that role. So I did have some hope that perhaps question period would be different. Cette semaine, nous avons un nouveau Parlement, une nouvelle session avec un nouveau chef de le Parti conservateur dans la Chambre des communes avec Jean Baird. Mais malheureusement, avec l'espoir que peut-être chose va différente dans une autre session, nous avons vu un Parlement tout le même chose, pas de changement, avec la façon de travail agressive, partisan, militant et bien sûr affreux. C'est dommage parce que nous avons actuellement les règlements contre cette façon de travail. Nous avons les règlements qui interdisent heckling. Je ne sais pas le mot en français pour heckling, mais excuse-moi. We're seeing a lot of proposals coming from good people. I want to thank Michael Chong of the Conservative Party, Glenn Pearson of the Liberal Party, and Denise Savoy of the NDP for spearheading collectively an effort to make question period work better. And I'd like to just review why it matters and then suggest what the Green Party thinks on these issues. First of all, why does it matter? A lot of the data I'm going to reference comes from this new edition of Policy Options magazine, which is dedicated to these issues. We know from Nick Nano's polling and from others that the majority of Canadians feel less happy with their government if they've watched question period. They are less engaged in democracy because of question period. And in the last election, 41% of Canadians didn't vote. So c'est un niveau absolument affreux d'avoir 41% des Canadiens qui ont choisi dans les dernières élections fédérales de ne voter pas. Ce n'est pas une vraie démocratie quand un groupe si grand que ça décide de ne voter pas, ne participer pas dans la démocratie. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire? We're looking at decision-making right now, what could make Parliament work better. First of all, let me just give a report card for this week. Un petit note pour cette semaine, pour la première semaine de Parlement. Ce n'est pas une bonne semaine pour le Parlement, pour les chambres des communes. We have seen heckling. It is intense. It is so loud that one cannot hear the answers, even when sitting, as I do, in the diplomatic gallery with an earpiece, attempting to hear what's going on the floor. You can't hear it over the noise. I watch carefully. It's true. All parties in the House of Commons contribute to this disrespectful and unacceptable behavior. But by far the Conservative caucus is the worst, not just because there are more of them, but because they are persistently louder and persistently ruder. It's not possible to watch it without drawing this conclusion. It's not a partisan conclusion. So as you see people rise, the Conservatives begin to yell at them before they even finish their question. In the past, I've watched Gordon O'Connor in the last spring when the Conservatives were out of order. He would actually turn and say to his colleagues, shh, 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 shh. I haven't once seen John Baird attempt to shush rude heckling. He sits there and smiles as the heckling unfolds. So we're not doing better. What could make things better? Well, we have a lot of good suggestions, as I mentioned, from Michael Chong's measures that are being put before the House as private members' bill, along with Denise Savoy and Glenn Pearson. But I want to draw Canadians' attention to the fact that we have rules already that prohibit this behavior. We don't need new rules. We need members of Parliament to observe the rules we have. Par règlement 16, il est interdit de faire une interruption quand quelqu'un a la parole. Under Rule 16, it is prohibited in the House of Commons to speak when another member is speaking. Now, this rule is, of course, uniformly ignored, but that doesn't mean it has ceased to exist. I've often asked MPs from previous eras about Parliament and question period because it's a common myth in the media that it's always been this bad, and therefore there's nothing we can do about it, and we shouldn't try. Some people in the media have even cynically suggested that it's just like hockey. And while people say they don't like to see fights on the ice, they wouldn't watch the game as much if there was no fighting on the ice. Democracy is not hockey. Our House of Commons is not a game. And people, when they turn on question period, are disgusted with Parliament and disgusted with their members and disgusted with our system of government and democracy itself when they see this kind of behavior. We wouldn't permit it from our children. These are like a bunch of schoolyard bullies, a bunch of they're bags of testosterone bouncing off each other in the House of Commons. It's not acceptable. It turns people off. And it's not that they stop watching a game of hockey. It's that they stop participating in democracy, which is a serious crisis for all of us of all political stripes. So in talking to people about the old days, was there ever a good old days? Flora MacDonald was the one who told me that in her view, Lucien Lamoureux was the last really effective Speaker of the House. Lucien Lamoureux's term ended September 29th, 1974. But I've been a close observer of Parliament Hill, and I think John Fraser did an awfully good job in the 1980s. He was the first elected Speaker. Now it's true, and some people will point out that we had things like the Rat Pack. We had John Nunziata and Sheila Copps. But the reason the Rat Pack was noticed was because you could hear them. In other words, the Rat Pack was an exception to the rule. They were aggressively rude and partisan and heckled. Right now, if they were in the House of Commons, you wouldn't hear them over the noise of the government benches. That's a change, and it's a change for the worse. So I challenge all members of Parliament to conduct themselves in accordance with the rules. We ask Canadians to do this. We ask Canadians to observe the rules, and yet in our House of Commons we ignore the rules that say two important aspects of Parliament that would change question period and I think lead to Canadians being re-engaged. One rule, you don't interrupt anyone who has the floor. You don't interrupt anyone who is speaking. That's Rule 16. The other rule, the Speaker of the House is able to enforce this, by the way, and punish people who don't follow the rules. The other rule is that a government minister, in answering a question, must ensure that their answer is responsive to the question. Now, there's no rule that provides that a minister of the Crown must give a full, complete answer or a fully honest answer, but it is required that the response address the question, at least in some way. And we've seen this abused significantly. More and more question period is being used as a place to test drive market messages for later advertising campaigns. I've observed very closely that lines that end up being used in conservative advertising are first used in what appear to be random heckling from backbenchers in the Conservative caucus. So before there was ever a television ad saying that Michael Ignatieff was just visiting, we heard, "You're just visiting," over and over again from the benches. Yesterday in the House, when Mike Savage was asking a question about new prisons, I wasn't able to identify which Conservative yelled this out, but I heard a Conservative male member shout out, "Abu Ghraib." Quite certain this confirms my fear of a season of intense political attack ads that will emerge attacking Michael Ignatieff over previous statements he's made. This isn't acceptable. This isn't just random heckling. This is the Conservative Party using the House of Commons itself to send out messages as if they were doing a television advertising campaign. The Liberals have started doing it too, having coordinated questions that all go to the same line over and over again, repeating a line. This is childish. We need questions that are real, that are delivered respectfully, that solicit answers that are relevant to the question asked. So those are the things that Greens want to see in the House of Commons, and I believe it really does matter. I saw Rex Murphy's column in the National Post saying it didn't matter at all because the larger political context was so disrespectful that even if you cleaned up question period, it wouldn't change things. I think differently. I think, and my analogy for this, which may seem to be from a too remote a context to have it be relevant, but I looked to Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, in which he describes what the city of New York did to reduce crime rates on the streets. They decided to pick one thing that they could control and see if they fixed it, if it would lead to better things. And they decided if they had a policy of zero tolerance for graffiti on the subway cars, would that then send a cue to the ridership that if someone was taking care of those cars so there was no graffiti, it wasn't okay to litter. And if it wasn't okay to litter, it was no longer seen as an abandoned area where you were no longer safe. It actually ended up working. Zero tolerance for graffiti, what might be seen as a trivial thing in the context of a crime rate, zero tolerance for graffiti led to cascading benefits that improved safety throughout Manhattan. I believe question period is the same. Zero tolerance for heckling, for insisting the rules be observed, would in fact lead to, I believe, more respect in the rest of the House of Commons proceedings, improved behavior within House committees, and, more importantly, an elevated sense of respect from the citizenry that the people they elect are not leaving them ashamed. This is what's happening now, and it erodes the very foundations of democracy when the behavior of parliamentarians is so far below the bar of acceptable behavior for kindergartners that we turn away in disgust. So I ask all of the members of Parliament to think seriously about turning over a new leaf and observing the rules we already have. Merci beaucoup. Et s'il y a les questions, je suis très heureuse de faire un effort.
What makes you think that your call is going to spur anyone to action?
I don't know, except for the fact that I know there are people who feel the same way. I've mentioned some of them, but there are more. In all parties, there are members of Parliament who hate what it's like. There are also those who revel in what it's like. And it's really a question of which party leaders are going to agree, as Greens believe, that inspiring Canadians to see Parliament as a place where the people's work is being done in a way that does honor to our traditions and our institutions and the fabric of the nation itself. Short of that, it just spirals downward. Once I'm elected, I have a very strong commitment to make sure heckling ends. But before I'm elected, I want to plead with the other party leaders in the House to begin that process.
Responsible. I mean, you talked about the Speaker. Are you putting this squarely on Speaker Milliken's shoulders, that he should really, keep the MPs in line with what's in the rules and punish MPs who don't abide by them?
I think that the blame is shared. Clearly, and I mentioned the speakers of the House that have done well over the years. Some people say it's because the question period became televised. But again, in the era in which I worked most closely before becoming leader of the Green Party, I was in the House most often when I worked in government in the late 80s, and question period was not as disrespectful as it is now, not at all. It was never abusive. You had moments that people remember, like Sheila Copps and John Crosby. But you also had moments of real parliamentary excellence. You had moments where people spoke in ways that suggested that we actually had a discourse and parliamentary language that was, pretty impressive. We're losing all of that. The whole process is being dumbed down to a sideshow. So who's responsible? Well, it's a trend line over time. TV certainly plays some role. Ignoring the rules doesn't help. And if the Speaker of the House suddenly started enforcing the rules, I think that members would be so stunned that they wouldn't know how to behave. I think it takes the various leaders of all the leaders in the House working with the Speaker and saying, okay, it's gone too far. It isn't a hockey game. We want you to know that as of now, the rules are going to be observed. And in that sense, they all bear responsibility. Each party leader, each party House leader, and the Speaker of the House need to make it right and enforce the rules we have.